To the segment of this show called the Roundup Wrap, where we invite our resident analyst, Mighty Jamie, to talk to us about some of the stories highlighted earlier, as well as throw forward to the week ahead. Good morning, Jamie. How are you?
Good morning to you. I'm doing good. Good morning. Good to see you.
Great, and hoping that the weekend was also fabulous. Or it
It
was,
was a bit busy.
yeah, it was.
It was, yeah, because my high school kids that I coach are doing debate competitions. So the
Ah.
weekend, they were debating all weekend. So basically 8 to 6 p.m. days over the weekend.
Awesome. That's great. And I'm sure they had a lot to gather in terms of information and stories that are making headlines. So I'm sure that was fun for you. Great to hear that. So today, let's start with Chad. The former prime minister in Chad and opposition leader Sukse Masra has been arrested at his home in Ghazi. We saw surveillance footage showing the leader of the Transformers political party being taken away by a squad of armed men. What is he being accused of?
Well, he's being accused of, basically causing insurrection in one region of the country or instigating violence in one region of the country. It seems to me, though, that part of this is just about the consolidation of power by the son of, Idris Deby, who used to be the president until he died. So now we've got Muhammad Deby, who's in power, who power over a military council, recently won a presidential election. Mazra was his former prime minister. He's an opposition leader. He was the main challenger, So in the southern region, there are ethnic tensions. There are people with a lot of grievances because development in the country is low. The human development index of the country is low. So there are a variety of what I would call ground-based issues. But what we are seeing now is that because there are tensions, the basically president right now is using a heavy hand to try to then send a message to, I guess, all of the other ethnicities that he's not going to be tolerating any dissent. He's not going to be tolerating any pushback. This reminds me in many ways of what happened in the early 80s in Zimbabwe, where we saw that the ZANU PF leadership of Robert Mugabe pushed back against the leadership of ZAPU and then basically, unleashed a reign of terror on ethnicities that were not predominantly Shona, and in so doing perpetrated what was considered to be a genocide at the time. And this is what it seems is happening in this particular instance as well. You've got a military dictatorship. You've got a family that has been in power for a very long time, controlling the levers of the state. You've got this challenger who is viewed by many to actually be the future president, and even the legitimate voice of the people, now being accused of instigating violence in the region where his ethnicity is based.
Sukse Masra's party has said that he had been kidnapped and demanded that he becomes released unconditionally. How true is that?
Well, I mean, politicians sometimes use this language loosely, to basically, because he's taken by government officials, he's taken by the police. So it's not necessarily kidnapped, he's arrested. But what they're trying to say is that the nature of his arrest and the political nature of his arrest is such that you could consider it to be akin to kidnapping. I think I once saw ministers saying that they were held hostage by union members who didn't want them to leave a meeting. And then they started saying we're being held hostage. It was romantic language, but probably misused in this particular case. We've seen even with the Trump administration, people being taken by officials in ways that they said wasn't in line with due process, but not quite something that we would compare to kidnapping, because there's no request for a ransom or anything like that. But it is a form of dictatorial suppression. It is a form of intimidation of political rivals. And it does indicate right now that there's no democracy in Chad. This is basically the long and short of the story. How the international community will respond is something that is going to be interesting as well, because we're in a period now where there is almost a renegotiation of the African political order. We've seen this alliance of Sahel states We've seen various other, groupings try to, impose their will, so to speak, on the direction of Africa. So the question then will be, with all of this happening, where is, the Deby family aligned to in this particular geopolitical moment? And will we see regional pushback to this arrest? Because the arrest of an opposition leader is something that is very significant in a country, and we don't see this in democracies. We don't see this in developed nations. We don't see this in nations that uphold human rights. So the fact that it's happening to arrest a former prime minister, it's not a joke. It's a very serious thing. So how the international community responds will be something that we have to look out for. And then that will give us an indication of, for instance, is the UN Security Council going to issue a statement? Are we going to see the African Union issue a statement? What's going to happen? Is the Trump administration going to get involved? Where do things stand? It's a serious issue. It's a sensitive issue, but we're seeing a dictator here consolidating power under the pretext of dealing with, insurrection.
Let's go to Libya now. Prime Minister in Libya, Abdullah Hamid al-Dibeiba, said on Saturday that eliminating militias is an ongoing process or project as a ceasefire after deadly clashes remained in place. So Dibeiba is the country's internationally recognized leader in the West, based in Tripoli. Let's talk about that he ordered the armed groups to be dismantled. Firstly, what do we know about fatalities and injuries from the clashes, and why this move, do you think?
Well, it's difficult to ascertain the exact numbers in a country like Libya right now because it's a war zone and journalists are not able to gather the data in the way that we sometimes have data coming from Gaza, coming from even Ukraine, because there that data is being compiled by the Ministry of Health in Gaza or the Department of Health there and by the Ukrainian government as well. So we'll probably get a clearer picture as to what is the consequence of all of these clashes that have happened between these two rival groups, because as things stand right now, we have two different groupings who claim to be leading or who are effectively leading different regions. We've got Khalifa Haftar who's leading in the east, and then we've got the Tripoli-based GNU government, which is the internationally recognized one. But even that concept of who is internationally recognized is a loose concept because the United Nations has given status to the Tripoli-based government, but other countries are dealing with all of these entities, buying oil from them. We've got various countries which seem to be involved in what is happening in the country. We've got Turkey, we've got Egypt, we've got the UAE, we've got Russia, so there are a variety of players here. Donald Trump has a strong relationship with the leader of Turkey, and that may influence things in terms of how he begins to view this, because if we all go back to when Libya got into this current status, this was because of that 2011 overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi, and the US and the French were involved. So at some point, if there's going to be a real return to peace or removal of guns in Libya, we'll have to get the involvement of those entities who broke Libya in the first place. Because one of the biggest things is after the no-fly zone, after all of that was done and Gaddafi was removed, these international actors moved on quite quickly and didn't support the rebuilding and the peace process that needed to be implemented. And that's why we saw vacuums of power, and we've seen basically for the last 14 years, Libya being in various states of war. And it's a crisis, I think, that was a product of international actors thinking that they understood the needs and the dynamics of a particular country, trying to teach Gaddafi a lesson and trying to remove him as a player in the name of this Arab Spring, which they said was going to be this wave of democracy. Looking back on all of this, there's a real concern about how everything played out, because right now, if you look at all of the countries where the Arab Spring was supposed to really have happened, you look at Tunisia, you look at Egypt, you look at Libya as the three African countries. Libya is a war zone. Tunisia is being run by a dictator, and there's a military regime in Egypt. So looking back at that international involvement and having started applying my mind to African issues around about that time, I'm really skeptical of how the international community, one, intervened in Africa, two, destabilized that region, and having Libya being basically a country with no real internal security, having militias, that contributed to the immigration issue that we've seen in Europe, because a lot of people who are aspiring to go to Europe and seeking a better outcome in Europe actually were going through Libya and then finding their way to countries like Turkey, finding their way to Greece, etc., and then trying to reach France, trying to reach the United Kingdom. All of that has led to increased xenophobia, increased Afrophobia even, and we've seen how that rhetoric has now been shaping European politics as well. For me, it all goes back to the Arab Spring, all goes back to this critical moment when, Muammar Gaddafi was shot and killed like a dog on the streets, in something where it was orchestrated by the French, by the Americans, and really damaged Africa and Africa's growth trajectory. We definitely lost somebody who was passionate about Africa, and that involvement, I think, damages the credibility of people like Hillary Clinton and the legacies of people like even Barack Obama. Unfortunately, even though he's given credit in other areas, Libya is one of his biggest failures as an international leader, and we're continuing to see the consequences of that. So whether or not there will be success going forward, it's an open-ended question, really, because this country has been at war basically since 2011.
Let's come to our shores now. South Africa, the President Cyril Ramaphosa is to head to the U.S. this week for a meeting with his U.S. counterpart, President Donald Trump. What do you make of the timing of this meeting, firstly?
Well, it's the timing is quite opportune, I think, because there may be an opportunity for President Ramaphosa to fix some of the challenges that have developed in the relationship between South Africa and the USA because of the activities, I think, primarily of Elon Musk. And if you've been looking on social media, there has been a preponderance and an exponential increase in the activity of anonymous accounts, which seem to be boosted by Elon Musk. And there's been a preponderance of Elon Musk sharing fake information and false news about South Africa. He has been participating in a massive disinformation campaign. And I think what he's trying to do is to unravel the prospects of success of this particular meeting, and maybe trying to reach Trump through social media, because maybe those things are also showing up on Trump's phone when he goes through social media, if he does at all. Because if we've been following the story, we know that as soon as Trump came in, he canceled the refugee program, he canceled US aid programs. That funding had a massive impact on South Africa, because 20% of South Africa's HIV funding for PEPFAR was coming from the USA. So this has a direct impact on South African health delivery. Real people are likely going to die as a result of Elon Musk's actions. He seems to be frustrated because of, not being able to get Starlink to operate in South Africa, which is something that he wanted to do. He then withdrew their application for a license from ICASA. So as things stand, we've seen Trump and Elon being side to side, almost like bros, and their bromance basically for the last 4 months, the world was watching it. But it seems as if South Africa was a unique target for them. And if President Ramaphosa can establish rapport with Donald Trump, he is somebody who is very charming, somebody who is very effective at being able to manage conversations with various actors. We saw that in the CODESA negotiations in the early 90s. We've seen that even with him being in the government of national unity. He's going with John Steenhuisen, the leader of the Democratic Alliance, to, I think, try to show President Trump that, listen, I'm here with an Afrikaner. There's no discrimination of Afrikaners. There's no genocide. The narrative of genocide, every time we have to say this, is a massive lie being perpetrated by people people who are trying to destroy the reputation and standing of South Africa. And they know that South Africa is having a tough reception on the global stage, particularly on the American stage, because of its relationships with China, its relationships with Russia, and the fact that it took Israel to the ICJ. So those type of things definitely caused friction with the Americans, caused friction with the Israelis, and we know that Israel and America have a close relationship. So some people have now been trying to exploit those tensions for their benefits, for their political ends, and I think that Elon Musk has been doing that. So if President Ramaphosa can actually navigate this moment, I think it will be something that cements his legacy as a negotiator. Many people are wondering if it's going to be like a Zelensky discussion. I don't think it will be, because Mr. Ramaphosa is not the type of person to interject and cut off somebody, and is quite used to speaking with global players and leaders on the international stage. Just a few months ago, he was having a conversation with Ursula von der Leyen. He's had conversations with all of the G7 leaders multiple times. So I think also he probably has done some preparatory legwork and will have something that he can negotiate with Mr. Trump. 600 American businesses operate in South Africa, Google, Microsoft, and several others. So I think there are interests here for the Americans to protect, and Trump is looking for a deal. I don't think he's looking to destroy the reputation and standing of the leader of the largest economy in Africa, and the most industrialized economy in Africa, because if he does that, that sends a message to the other 54 countries that go to China, go to Russia, forget about doing business with the Americans, something he doesn't want to do at this point.
Well, we'll leave it there for today. It's going to be quite an interesting week, quite a number of news
items. It's going to be a movie.
Exactly. A lot of stories to follow up on. But thank you so much. And I love what you do with the kids and the debating. So have a great week.
Thanks so much. Have a great one too.
Thank you. That's Mighty Jamie, a resident analyst for our Roundup Wrap. It's quite an interesting week, this one. The news flowing in.
Yeah.
Some weeks are not the same.
For sure. But, with 54 countries, there's never a dull moment on the continent.
Never. Let's get our news headlines now. 6:31 Central African Time. Good morning, Onele.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has departed for the U.S. He is expected to arrive in Washington later today. The highly anticipated meeting has been framed as an opportunity to correct the misinterpretations about South Africa. Nigerian televangelist Timothy Omotoso has left South Africa, ending a near decade-long legal battle. Omotoso, who was arrested in 2017 on over 90 charges, was recently acquitted of 32 of them, but was rearrested earlier this month by migration officials and declared a prohibited person. And the former U.S. President Joe Biden has been diagnosed with prostate cancer. A statement from his office says he has an aggressive form of the disease, but it appears it can be managed. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Ntsinsi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Right, it's time to find out what's been happening in the world of sport. And over the weekend, Crystal Palace football team, 119 years old, has never won a major trophy, and they beat Manchester City in the FA Cup final. And Musibudi Makura, I'm sure at some point will be reflecting on that. Good morning, as she brings us the sport.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Very good morning from the sports desk. Indeed, a great weekend for Crystal Palace. 120 years this club has existed, and for the very first time in that existence, winning their first ever major trophy. And Manchester City, Peter, will end this season trophyless. When last When last did Manchester City end a season without a trophy? But nonetheless, we'll speak about that a little bit later on this morning on the show. But for now, we need to celebrate South Africa. Amajita, the SA Under-20 team, winning their maiden Total Energies CAF Under-20 Africa Cup of Nations title. This following a hard-fought 1-0 victory over Morocco in Sunday night's final at the June 30 Stadium in Cairo. It was Homolemo's Skagana stunning a second-half strike that proved decisive as the South African claimed the trophy and also rewrote history by overcoming a North African opponent in the tournament for the very first time by winning this title. Both sides entered the final unbeaten, boasting some of the tournament's best defensive records. South Africa's victory also marks their first ever youth continental triumph and also adds to the growing list of recent debut winners following Senegal's success back in 2023. It also broke their jinx against North African opposition, ending a run of 5 previous defeats, all by a single goal margin. Meanwhile, Amajita goalkeeper Fletcher Smythe-Lowe was named the Total Energies Man of the Match after his heroic display helped secure that 1-0 victory over Morocco. The goalkeeper delivered another commanding performance between the posts, producing a string of crucial saves to deny the North Africans and ensure South Africa lifted their first ever Under-20 AFCON title. This is what he had to say after being awarded that trophy last night.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it means a lot to not only me but for the team. This award is for the team. I mean, with only me and without them, we'd be nowhere. Together we're stronger. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's nice to do my part, but the real plaudits go out to everyone who does the work. Not even the people behind the scenes, physios, doctors, fitness coaches, and the players as well. I mean, it's amazing what we've been able to do. Thank you so much.
Meanwhile, South Africa's Tyron Smith was named the best player of the Total Energies CAF Under-20 Africa Cup of Nations tournament in Egypt last night, following his pivotal role in guiding the Amajita side to their first ever continental title. The 19-year-old midfielder delivered consistently and influential performances throughout the tournament and was also instrumental in South Africa's 1-0 victory over Morocco in Sunday's final at the Cairo International Stadium. Smith, known for his composure, creativity, as well as the ability to dictate the tempo, scored the crucial semi-final winner against Nigeria and also proved vital in linking midfield as well as attack across this year's campaign. On to some golf news now. An emotional Scotty Scheffler held off a rejuvenated John Rahm to convert his 54-hole lead into a maiden US PGA Championship title. So while the winning margin of 5 strokes suggests his third major was a formality, a different story threatened to unfold at Quail Hollow. Now, world number 1 Scheffler began 3 shots ahead and also 5 clear of Rahm, but it became a two-way duel for the Wanamaker Trophy. Now, the patchy front 9 from Scheffler, along with the Spaniard Rahm's flurry of birdies around the turn, meant they shared the lead midway through the final round. However, Rahm collapsed over his final 3 holes and Scheffler coasted to a major title that also joins his Masters victories in 2022 as well as 2024. The 28-year-old was in tears walking down the 18th hole, and his animated celebrations after sinking the winning putt demonstrated just how much this latest win means to him. In tennis news now, Carlos Alcaraz ended world number 1 Jannik Sinner's 26-match winning streak with a 7-6, 6-1 win in the Italian Open final last night. Now, Sinner, playing in his first major tournament since a 3-month doping ban, was hoping to become just the first Italian men's singles winner at the tournament since Adriano Panatta in 1976. But after edging a 10-set tiebreak, 4-time Grand Slam champion Alcaraz was a class above in the second set. Sinner had 2 set points in the first set, but his backhand returned wide to let the reigning French Open champion Alcaraz off the hook. The 22-year-old Spaniard took full advantage with some masterful play in the second set, sealing the title with a cross-court volley at the net. Meanwhile, there was also a win for Yasmin Paulini, producing a scintillating display as she blew away Coco Gauff in straight sets to end a 40-year wait for a home winner of the women's singles at the Italian Open, roared by a partisan crowd on court on Saturday, including Italian President Sergio Mattarella. Paulini triumphed 6-4 and 6-2 against Gauff of the USA. Paulini was also a surprise finalist at the French Open and Wimbledon last year, wrapped up the victory on the clay court in just 1 hour and 29 minutes. The 29-year-old was the first Italian woman to win the tournament since Raffaella Reggi in 1985 and only the fourth overall since its inception in 1930. Victory also means she will move up a place to fourth position on the world rankings when they are released later on today, and obtain a top 4 seeding from the French Open, which officially begins next weekend. That concludes your sports news this hour. For any sports stories you would like to share with us, our email address is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or give us a call on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Hello there. Do you want to elevate your business and give it a voice in South Africa and Africa as a whole? Well, in that case, let Channel Africa make this a possibility. Channel Africa is willing to advertise your business for as little as 30,000 rands or $1,719.18. To get access to these great rates, send all
Let's get our first update in terms of the world of business. As we say, good morning to Buntle Headbush.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says it's all systems go for the national budget to be presented on Wednesday. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is back to the drawing board, crafting a third budget after 2 failed attempts due to disagreements amongst members of Government of National Unity, particularly the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance parties over the proposed value-added tax increase. The president says the finance minister is putting the final touches to the third iteration and will be ready to present the budget on Wednesday.
Yes, no, the budget is almost ready. The Minister of Finance is putting the final touches to the budget, and that is going to be presented on the 21st. So that is not a problem at all.
Meanwhile, South Africa's Democratic Alliance says it's hoping for a case of third time lucky when the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana delivers his budget speech on Wednesday. The first budget speech on the 19th of February was cancelled a few minutes before the address after partners in the Government of National Unity rejected the proposed VAT hike, while the second version, tabled on the 12th of March, was also rejected by some parties, including the DA. The party's Willie Okamp says he hopes for the best on Wednesday.
We know and we believe that we will not have any VAT increase or any other unreasonable tax increases because the South African people just can't afford that. We must do a lot to improve infrastructure spending, and I think that is what we will see in this budget. If we spend money in the right places on building roads, on improving our ports and our rail infrastructure, on bringing better medical services to the people, improving hospitals, building schools. Those are all places where we must spend our money.
The Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities in South Africa, together with the Development Bank of Southern Africa, will today host the G20 Business roundtable on the empowerment of women and disability inclusion in the banking sector in Johannesburg. The breakfast meeting aims to engage the banking sector to invest in the work of the Empowerment of Women Working Group and the G20 Disability Inclusion Initiatives. Sisi Sechalo reports.
The breakfast roundtable will also focus on discussing banking sector investments in sustainable projects and providing financial commitments towards initiatives aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals (SDGs) and the G20 Inclusive Growth Objectives. This will include green bonds, impact investing, and other financial instruments. Various South African banks, other financial institutions, and tax collector, South African Revenue Service, are expected to be part of the discussions.
Namibia's President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah says the recently discovered oil and gas in her country is set to benefit the region and Africa as a whole, as she invites neighboring countries to form partnership in the exploration of the commodity. Ndaitwah, the first woman to be elected president and sworn in this March, is already spreading her wings across the region, strengthening already existing diplomatic and trade ties, as well as opening new ones, with Gaborone and Lusaka being her latest. Arthur Davis Sikopo has more.
It is one of her first trips outside the country since being sworn in as president. And on this double country tour, Dr. Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah sets her foot in Gaborone, Botswana, and meets that country's leader, Advocate Duma Boko, and discuss a number of bilateral and regional matters, including the discovery of oil and gas.
Oil prices were little changed this morning, with investors eyeing the outcome of Iran-US nuclear talks. Analysts say investors are also keeping an eye out for key economic data due from China that will assess their impact on its commodities demand following trade tensions with the United States. Brent crude futures edged down 5 cents to $65.36 a barrel after rising more than 1% last week, following the agreement by the US and China to a 90-day pause on their trade war, during which both sides will sharply lower trade tariffs. Now, taking a look at our financial indicators this morning, $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,599 naira 70. In Botswana, it's at 13 pula 40. Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 58, and in Zambia, it's at 26 kwacha 69. Moving to the BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is trading at 5 reals 66. Russia, 80 rubles 84. India, 85 rupees 56. China is at 7 yuan 20, and South Africa $1 is trading at 18 rand 2 cents. $1 is trading at 75 pence to the British pound and 89 to the euro. Taking a look at our commodities, gold is trading at $3,225 and platinum at $991 per ounce this morning, while Brent crude oil is at $65.26 a barrel. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I'm Buntle Hedbush.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa.
So our G20 fact for this Monday, the 19th of May, is the main element of the logo for South Africa's G20 presidency represents the King Protea, which holds a special place in the hearts of South Africans as the national flower of the country. It embodies resilience, cultural pride, hope, and natural splendor. The Protea logo is covered with the colors of the country's flag. That's green, gold, black, blue, red, and white, representing the country's diverse heritage and cultural vibrancy. And that's our G20 fact for this morning.
G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa, championing Africa through solidarity, equality, and sustainability. What does Africa's future look like? And are we bold enough to shape it? Okay. Join Channel
Right, now across Africa, women remain underrepresented in key areas of leadership, from political power and economic opportunity to access to land and finance. But a bold new Pan-African initiative is looking to change that. The Heritage Collective has launched its flagship salon-style event, Her Circle. And this is all happening in Abidjan, creating an international space that not only invites women to the table, but also encourages them to design it themselves. Described as a disruption to the status quo, Her Circle is bringing together women from across the continent to reimagine leadership, influence policy, and strengthen support networks through storytelling, collaboration, and collective power. Well, to tell us a little bit more about this initiative and what it hopes to achieve, we're now joined by Sally Namani, who's a Nigerian-American social entrepreneur, Chief Partnerships and External Officer at Peace Players International, and one of the co-conveners of behind the Heritage Collective. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mabu. Thank you so much for having me. And before we jump into questions and speaking about the Heritage Collective and who we are and what our vision is, I'm joined by one of my co-convener, Habiba Waziri. In fact, Habiba is the visionary force behind the Heritage Collective. We've all been good friends for a while and kind of all work in different spaces, but also all have the same values and objectives with how we see women in leadership. And so we brought our minds, our brilliance and intelligence together to create the Heritage Collective. So Habiba and I are in town together right now, and I thought it was best to have her be part of the conversation today.
All right, fantastic. Habiba, welcome to you as well. Good to have you on board. So let's start here. Habiba, maybe let's start with you then. Take us into the heart of this initiative. What is this Heritage Collective, and what inspired the creation of Her Circle?
Thank you, Mabu. That's a very good question. Good morning to your viewers. So the Heritage Collective exists to close the gap between access and ambition for emerging African women on the continent and in the diaspora. Of course, we're open to other, all types of women, but that's really our core focus. Why it started was because at the UNGA last year, we had friends that were in town, friends that were also attending the UNGA for the first time, and I was supposed to have enough time to take everyone around, but then I couldn't. And of course, people like my friends who are dear to me, couldn't make time because they were also busy. So I decided to just start a WhatsApp group. And then I just started sharing my personal invitations to, the events, especially the ones that were Africa focused, to, other friends on the group. And then I just started pulling in more friends, and then they started bringing in more friends. And before you know it, we were slightly under 50 people, 50 women on the group, discussing Africa, making sure our voices were there. We were going to closed door events because we had access to the RSVPs on time. And this just turned into something bigger than us. It was honestly just a simple group chat that was just making sure we were at the right place at the right time. And it turned out to be that the need was there in New York and back at home. And that's how the Heritage Collective started.
Wow. Well, let's talk a little bit about Her Circle now. Sally, the language used to describe Her Circle is powerful. It's called a disruption and a space to design the table. What does that mean practically for African women leaders?
Yeah, so often when we go to high-level events, you find that there's a panel, there are maybe women or men who are well along in their careers who are speaking about, what they've done or what they're currently doing. And there are few opportunities for women who are kind of emerging, who are in the room to share their journey, to share their experiences, and to feel like they belong on those platforms. And so we wanted to completely take away the hierarchy within these spaces. And also to celebrate, to create an opportunity for women and men, women especially at different points in their careers, to be in the same room as even more accomplished women, and really take away that hierarchy, that feeling of, she's far along, she's there, and I'm here. And we're here on the same level playing field, and put out questions, what we call spark questions, to begin to break down and demystify what it means to be at the top of your game, right? And we remember when we were just starting out our careers as interns or as volunteers or just a very younger point in our careers and feeling like, certain heights were unattainable. And that's because it felt, the journey from where we started to where we wanted to go felt so far. But being in the same room, in the same spaces as people who've done it, who also share similar challenges as us, kind of humanizes the journey. And so that's what we want to bring into these spaces, is less hierarchy, more this is the raw truth, this is what it takes, and here's how you can build your own path. And that's what our circle is about. We kicked it off in Abidjan, but we're looking forward to like the other kind of next iterations of it, and to continue to fine tune it. But ultimately, at the crux of what we're doing is less hierarchy and more authenticity. More, this is the path to influence, and we'll help you get there through our networks and through upscaling as well.
So, Abiba, we know that, the message you're giving me is quite inspiring and empowering, but we know, sadly, that there are some systemic issues, barriers to leadership, like access to capital, networks, land ownership, and dare I say, even patriarchy. How does her circle work to break down some of these barriers?
So a lot of times we like to focus on the negatives, or I guess you would say the challenges. What we try to, push forward at the collective is the fact that, I have some kind of experience, Sally has some kind of experience, the rest of our members of our collective have some kind of experience, but we are willing to help. We are willing to start somewhere. There's always going to be a challenge one way or the other. Access to capital is one, and I think it doesn't only affect women. Of course, it affects women more. However, some of our first sponsors, actually our second sponsor for the event is actually second, third, they're all male. They all run successful companies, and it wasn't really difficult to convince them because, it was just, how do I say this? It was just there, and there was no way they could say no. It was just a very simple concept that made sense to them because a lot of the people that we know are pro-women and they support women's initiatives, and they also support people like myself. They've given me opportunities before. They've given other people opportunities before. So it just didn't make sense for them to say no. Of course, skills, and then when you say things like land, there's always going to be a challenge somewhere. But if we're willing to put in the work and we're willing to use our own networks and our resources, a lot of times we always tend to forget the male allies when we're talking about women-focused events, but the male allies are right there with us. Our male allies are right there with us. Of course, our first sponsor was a woman. Our lead sponsor that came on board was a woman. But at the end of the day, a lot of the conversations ended up being around the men also encouraging the women, because we know we can't do it alone. We're not trying to create another niche. We're not, by separating the men. That's not what we're trying to do. We want to walk together, and we definitely don't want to do it by ourselves.
So, Sally, there's a strong Pan-African focus to this movement, with conveners and participants from across the continent and even the diaspora. How important is it to have this cross-border, cross-sector collaboration? And are you finding that the struggle is more or less the same across borders?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm probably more, the challenges are probably more steep for young women on the continent, right? Where, some of our kind of deep-seated hierarchies in our cultures sometimes even limit women's belief in their possibilities for themselves. And so, like, through the collective and events and programming that we plan to host with the collective, part of that is mindset, right? It's creating that environment where you're in a room filled with women who are empowered. That energy, rubs off on you. And so, to speak to the Pan-African part of it, and also the pillars of the collective, it's, first is access and opportunity and exposure. And that pillar is really about being in the room, seeing women who you might admire or women who have similar or different paths to you, and seeing what it took in their journey to kind of self-actualize, and recognizing that there's probably more similarities in you between you and them than you might think. The second is visibility and voice. So when you're in the room, using your voice, feeling confident in that voice, no matter how scary and challenging it might feel, knowing that you have a voice that is important and is needed to shape the future of the continent. And the third is collective growth, right? We're in different sectors, different points of leadership. But again, in order to move the work forward and create more access and more seats for women in decision-making rooms, we have to think about it from a collective standpoint and not from it can only be me as standpoint. And so part of that capacity and collective growth is we all bring different expertise to the collective. And what we want to do is democratize access to that expertise.
Ladies,
right? So
I wish we could carry on for much longer, but we've run out of time, sadly. But thank you so much for sharing this powerful story, inspirational, and we wish you the best of luck with this movement.
Thank you so much for having us. And you can find us on LinkedIn, The Heritage Collective, on Instagram.
The Heritage Collective.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much for having
us. Have a good one.
Thank you, Sally and Aviva. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for your time. All right. It's a beautiful story.
Shine. We now enter the second hour of it, and my name is Asanda Beda.
And I'm Peter Ndoro. And it's the second hour already.
Yeah.
It's amazing how quickly time flies, hey?
It's the second hour.
Wow.
We'll cover quite a few number of issues in this hour, but let's quickly cross to Onele Nzinzi for our news update. And then following her will be Musubudi Makura with the sports headlines.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has departed for the U.S. He is expected to arrive in Washington later today. That will be ahead of a key bilateral meeting with President Donald Trump at the White House on Wednesday, Sharon Bryce Peace reports.
The highly anticipated meeting has been framed as an opportunity to reset the strategic relationship between Washington and Pretoria and draw the Trump administration into deeper engagement within the G20. While the visit will be seen as an opportunity to correct misrepresentations about South Africa as alleged in Trump's sweeping executive order in February, issues around trade, tariffs and geopolitical concerns, including Ukraine and Gaza, could feature prominently. The White House custom has been to engage nation leaders in front of the world's media, which could offer a riveting window into how these two heads of state interact face-to-face on issues of such sensitivity as alleged genocide against white Afrikaners who have been welcomed as refugees into the United States.
Meanwhile, some South Africans have expressed mixed views over the visit by President Cyril Ramaphosa to the U.S.
Can we be allowed to have South African solutions for South African problems?
President Ramaphosa and President Trump should focus on just trying to have benefits on both countries.
I don't think this meeting is going to yield any positive result.
So Ramaphosa should do as Trump is, firstly make peace. The South African government has attacked Israel in the ICJ. I think it's a huge mistake.
Personally, I do believe that Trump is just playing politics.
It's very important that all relations are intact for the good of our economy.
As a president of a country of over 60 million people, you need to know that you've got so many people backing up, so you shouldn't be bullied by a president from another country.
Nigerian televangelist Timothy Omodoso has left South Africa, ending a near decade-long legal battle. Omodoso, who was arrested in 2017 on over 90 charges, including rape and human trafficking, was recently acquitted of 32 charges. He was re-arrested earlier this month by immigration officials and declared a prohibited person. He was deported to Nigeria yesterday. Leading Kenyan lawyer and the country's former Justice Minister Martha Karua says she has been deported from Tanzania to prevent her from attending a court case of opposition leader Tundu Lissu. 2 colleagues accompanying her were also reported detained and deported after flying in from neighboring Kenya. Lissu, who is leader of Tanzania's main opposition Chadema party, is due to appear in court today after being charged with treason last month. Karua is a respected human rights advocate and a vocal critic of what she calls democratic backsliding in East Africa. Tanzanian authorities have not yet commented. The former U.S. President Joe Biden has been diagnosed with prostate cancer. A statement from his office says he has an aggressive form of the disease, but it appears it can be managed. The BBC's Naomi Iqbal.
In a statement, President Biden's office said the cancer had spread to his bones. The statement went on to say that the cancer is hormone sensitive, which allows for effective management, and he and his family are reviewing treatment options. This comes as the former president steps back into the spotlight months after President Trump returned to the White House. Books and articles critical about Biden's presidency are being released, but he pushed back in a recent US TV interview against claims that he suffered from mental decline.
Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nzinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in sport news this hour, South Africa's Amajita crowned AFCON Under-20 champions after beating Morocco 1-0 last night in Egypt. And then a dominant Scotty Scheffler resists Jon Rahm's challenge to win the US PGA Tour. Details coming up at 7:30.
Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter.
The Burundi National Communication Council has issued a decision requiring state and private media to respect the principles of equal access and balance of information during the campaign for legislative and municipal elections on June the 5th. More from Marius Muriwe, who is in Bujumbura.
This decision concerns the respect of the electoral law in its 31st article. This stipulates that all candidates, independent candidates and political parties, including coalitions, that they may use state media for their election campaigns, and the National Communications Council, as a Burundi media regulator, must ensure the equal access to state media for all candidates. According to some political parties, independents and coalitions, they say that they are worried about the fact that some state or private media lack the necessary resources for media coverage. Thus, the Article 4 of this decision stipulates that coverage must be fully funded by this media. According to this decision of Burundi media regulator, Article number 6 stipulates that during the campaign for legislative and municipal elections, the principles of the equal access and balanced information must be definitely respected for all candidates in the race. Therefore, some political parties are calling on the National Communications Council to sanction some media and professionals of media that will violate this article. Esperance Ndayizeye, the chairperson of Burundi Media Regulator, warns these media and the professionals of media about the violation of rules.
We know that the role of the media is very important in elections to ensure fair and free elections. That's why the National Council of Communication has conveyed to a meeting political parties, coalitions of parties and independent candidates to elections to ensure that each one of them has space and the time in the public media.
As the election campaign continues, some political parties are lamenting about the economic crisis here in the country, and Esperance Ndayizeye also warns them not to spread defamatory speech, rather to talk about their social projects.
The messages must only be on society projects or political programs rather than hate speeches, insults, or defamations or other non-necessary messages.
This Wednesday, Burundi Independent Electoral Commission has extended of 1 day a withdrawal of voting cards for citizens following the Commission's observation about challenges distribution. Marius Mohigwe, Channel Africa, Bujumbura.
In an era of constant transformation, museums play a pivotal role in navigating a dynamic landscape shaped by global events and evolving societal needs. This is according to Marketing and Communications Manager of the Ditsong Museums of South Africa, Lemohang Zincume. As International Museum Day was commemorated on the 18th of May, some of the museums in South Africa's Gauteng province were providing free entrance and hosting a number of activities for communities throughout this month in an effort to encourage citizens to visit museums. Sisi Sikhalo has more.
This museum was established during the Second World War as a memorial to South Africans who had fought and died during that war. It has since become a memorial to all South Africans who served their country and who died for their country. And we portray the military history of South Africans and South Africa.
And anybody wanting to come to the museum, what can they expect?
Well, there's a whole range of exhibits. We've got technology such as aircraft, tanks, vehicles, guns. That tells you about the technology of warfare. We have thematic displays. We have displays of uniforms, badges, medals, and such, small arms collection and edged weapons, that's swords and knives, etc.
That was the director of the Ditsong National Museum of Military History, Alan St. Clair, telling us about their museum, which is located in the city of Johannesburg. Even though almost everyone is embracing technology, nothing can take away the excitement of a side visit to a museum. Channel Africa caught up with two visitors at the museum, Simbai Vumburai from Zimbabwe and John Kane, originally from Cape Town, but now residing in Johannesburg. They share their experience.
It's been great learning a lot of the stuff that I wouldn't have known and probably wouldn't have had the interest just to find out by myself, but actually to see some of the planes, some of the tanks and some of the stuff that's on display has been really educational.
So Herman and I have come to visit here with three youngsters, two from South Africa, one from Zimbabwe, who would not remember much about the army or the stuff that happened, even the older wars that we would have attended or have known of because of our parents. So my age is 56. The youngsters range between early 20s and 30. And it's been quite a revelation for them, for us to be able to walk around and tell them about the planes, the weaponry that we were involved in the army in our days. It's an absolutely magnificent rendition. I'm amazed to see the museum in this condition.
Marketing and Communications Manager at Ditsong Museums of South Africa, Lemohang Zincume, says museums continue to be spaces of education. They enable people to appreciate various cultures. They further provide spaces for relaxation and entertainment. She elaborates further on this.
If you visit the Ditsong National Museum of Natural History in Pretoria, you will come across one of our artifacts called Mrs. Place. This is a fossil skull that is believed to be a distant relative of humans. It was discovered by one of our curators, Dr. Robert Broom, in 1947. Now, this artifact gave important support to Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, which indicates how humans evolved from apes to what we have become today. So this research that was conducted in the museums has played an important role in understanding some of these theories. If you visit the Military History Museum today, you'll find the exhibition on women in the liberation struggle. And this exhibition teaches us about women like Krotoa Eva, Queen Nonesi of Abatembu, Olive Schreiner, and many other women. And when we reflect on their stories, we realize that women have always had wisdom and courage, even in the most difficult circumstances.
There will be numerous activities at their museums throughout this month. She takes us through some of the activities.
We'll be celebrating International Museum Day through exhibitions, public lectures, museum tours. Some of our museums will provide free entrance, and we have a few museums opening art exhibitions. For instance, in the National Museum of Cultural History opened an art exhibition in Pretoria. We also opened a Women in the Liberation Struggle exhibition at the National Museum of Military History in Johannesburg. Pretoria Art Museum has an exhibition on coral brick collection of ceramics. That's one of the activities happening there. And also at the Military History Museum in Johannesburg, we have a new exhibition on the role of Indians in the military.
Meanwhile, the Ditso National Museum of Military History is also home to the military veterans, such as the 32 Battalion and South Africa's liberation movements. For Channel Africa, I'm Sisi Sekhalo in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Bringing you the energy, news, and good vibes to kickstart your day. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
16 minutes past 7 Central African time. Let's get into the world of fintech now, with South Africa's repo rate holding steady and access to affordable credit remaining limited. Property professionals are facing growing pressure to fast-track cash flow and close deals efficiently. In response, digital finance solutions are gaining traction as a lifeline in an otherwise sluggish property market. Joining us is Michael Lenz, CEO of Transbridge, to discuss how digital finance is helping to unlock liquidity and why the convergence of PropTech and FinTech is becoming increasingly vital to South Africa's economic resilience. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. How are you on this Monday?
I'm very well, thank you, Asanda. Good morning to you and your listeners, and thanks for having me on your program.
Thank you for making time. We appreciate it. So let's talk the different ways that digital finance is helping property professionals to accelerate cash flow.
So for us, it comes down to bridging funding in a transaction, and our major stakeholders in the transactions are your sellers and realtors. Often in property transactions, there are costs that are sort of levied against sellers. Sellers often unaware of these costs. They relate to municipal rates, levies, and compliance certificates, and come sometimes as a shock in a transaction whereby formal registration hasn't taken place yet. So access to these funds are sort of locked up in a transaction. And they sometimes can derail or even sort of delay a transaction. So that's from the seller's point of view. Where we come in as assistants as well is in terms of your realtors, where you'll understand that their commissions are also locked up in these in these registration transfers and processes, and can often cause a gap that might even limit their ability to cover costs such as marketing, agency costs, or living expenses. And really, that's where we then come in terms of trying to offer a solution from a bridging funding gap in trying to move deals forward.
How would you describe today's lending environment, making your products very necessary for the market?
I think the sort of climate that we deal in terms of this bridging funding is still quite to a large degree manual and rigid, and typically involves wet signatures, documentation, sometimes even credit vetting. And this is sort of handled through a back and forth between the various parties, being your agents, your sellers, your attorneys, and the funders at the end of the day. So what this does is it just causes additional delays, uncertainty, margin for errors, and these approvals can take days and sometimes weeks in terms of the disbursements, and they're really immediate, So it puts pressure on the transactions, and it even puts pressure on the attorney that is trying to move the transaction forward.
So why is the integration of prop tech and fintech becoming so critical for real estate, especially in the country?
So what we've done at Transbridge is developed a next generation prop tech and fintech solution. And what it does, it digitizes what has been this long and manual, slow process. So what we've developed is a secure cloud-based platform, and this is accessible via app and web. And what it actually does, it connects all these parties, so your sellers, your realtors, and your attorneys, in one integrated ecosystem with customized journeys for each of the parties. If I can maybe get in some of the tech that we've embedded.
Yes.
We've got an AI-powered vetting system that's implemented, which looks at your forms in real time. Once approved, these funds are then distributed into a secure transaction-specific wallet, and we can do this within 24 hours, mitigating sort of the days and sometimes weeks that it takes for these funds to be beneficiated. And in terms of the infrastructure, we've got bank verification APIs that we built in, as well as some payment that also just talk to a wallet to trust disbursement.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. We're going to leave it there for today, Michael. And you do have a great start to your week.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Michael Lenz, the CEO of Transbridge, joining us on the line, discussing fintech, proptech, the emergence, the integration of that when it comes to real estate and the different digital finance solution products they offer at Transbridge.
Start your day informed, inspired, and entertained. Asanda and Peter bring you Rise and Shine. Weekdays, 6 till 9 a.m. Central African Time.
South Africa's Deputy Minister in the Presidency, Nongceba Mhlaudi, last Friday delivered a keynote address at the Tshwane University of Technology Soshanguve campus, and that's just north of Pretoria, where she engaged with undergraduate students from the Faculty of Humanities, particularly in public management and journalism, as part of the G20 outreach program. Speaking to Channel Africa, Mhlaudi emphasized the importance of informing young people about South Africa's G20 presidency, its origins, purpose, and what it all means for ordinary South Africans. Channel Africa reporter Michael Mbewe picks up the story for us.
Following the joint launch of the G20 Community Town Hall Outreach Project by South Africa's Department of International Relations and Cooperation and the University of South Africa last Wednesday, this engagement marked the first in a series of national G20 dialogues led by the Presidency, GCIS and public institutions, including universities and TVET colleges. Speaking to Channel Africa, Deputy Minister in the Presidency, Nongceba Mhlaudi, explains their presence at TUT.
This morning we are at the Tshwane University of Technology Soshanguve campus as part of our public engagements with students on South Africa's presidency of the G20, as well as the benefits that South Africa's presidency of the G20 has for the ordinary South Africans. We were engaging with undergrad students from the Faculty of Humanities, covering public management as well as journalism. And more than anything, we gave them a bit of history of what the G20 is, how it started, why South Africa is a part of it, of course, as an important multilateral body.
She emphasized the need for young people as future leaders and policymakers to be informed about the G20's role and its relevance to their lives.
For us, the reason that we're having this public engagement is precisely so that our young people, one, are informed about it. they know that it's happening, they know what it means, they know what it means to them, but also as people that we view are going to be the future leaders of this country. You know, we're speaking to journalism students, we're speaking to public management students. These are the people that are going to be the policymakers in the future. The agreements that get signed today at the G20 level, they are going to have to implement, you know, in the next 10 years to come. So therefore it becomes important for them to be engaged within what's happening in their country, but also what that means for them and as future leaders as well.
Being the first leg of engagement, she said the discussions were meaningful.
This is the first of a series of engagements that government will be embarking at different institutions of higher learning between ourselves in the presidency, our colleagues, GCIS, with the various public institutions, which is your universities and your TVET colleges as well.
A multilateral Youth 20 championed by the National Youth Development Agency is also on the horizon, aiming to place youth development and empowerment firmly on the G20 agenda.
And the agenda, of course, will be youth development, youth empowerment, and ensuring that the condition of young people in these member states and as well as across the African continent is one that is top of the agenda of the G20.
South Africa is leading the G20 presidency under the theme Solidarity, Equality, Sustainability, while Tshwane University of Technology leads the academic track of the G20. Its spokesperson, Papama Shisikawe.
Today was all about information sharing more than anything. So it's the Tshwane University of Technology and government coming together to educate our students, particularly on the G20, the initiatives and all the engagements leading up to the summit. As you have seen today, you know, not all students know about the G20 and what it's all about. So basically it's the Tshwane University of Technology saying, government, come on board. We have public management students, we have journalism students, you know, and it's important for them as they graduate and move forward, and some of them becoming government officials as well, and the journalists asking the questions and holding government accountable to know about the G20, the initiatives, you know, and the discussions, and engage as well and participate in them. So today was all about that.
Channel Africa spoke to TUT students to gauge their understanding of the G20. Nelisiwe Mtlongo is a journalism student at TUT.
According to my understanding, G20 is all about countries coming together to discuss their economic issues concerning their countries. I think it is important for us as a youth so that we can be able to learn and develop some skills. Learning about the G20 can bring so many opportunities to us as a youth. As we can see, there's a higher number of unemployment rate in our country.
Kanyisile Makobo, a public management student, says she was blind on G20, but now she can see.
Upon my arrival, my colleagues, I'd like to say that my colleagues, they were asking open questions that really had me having an opinion and a say about G20, and I'm proud to say G20 is something that South Africa, it almost feels like a revolution, it almost feels like change. It is something that South Africa needs, and it's something that South Africa really needs to implement, especially in our local communities, in our local societies, so that the youth can be informed.
Michael Mbewe, Channel Africa News, Johannesburg.
G20 in Africa, exclusive to Channel Africa, championing Africa through solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Africa in Song with Chanduko Ligege.
So the artist that I just played now went by the name A.B. Crystal. So A
I'm going to take you back in history. And what's bizarre is that it's going to sound like it's today. So on this day, 1993, the ANC and the National Party agree on power sharing. South Africa's multi-party negotiating process reached a milestone when the ANC and the National Party agreed on interim constitution and power-sharing formula, paving the way for democratic elections 1994. Doesn't that sound like the GNU 2025?
They always say history repeats itself.
Wow.
And I think it actually really does happen in life, that you see that.
Gosh.
Interesting one. Thanks for that day in history. In fact, 7:30 Central African time it is. And we get our news headlines now. Here's Onele Nsinzi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Asanda. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has departed for the U.S. He is expected to arrive in Washington later today. The highly anticipated meeting has been framed as an opportunity to correct misrepresentation about South Africa. Leading Kenyan lawyer and the country's former Justice Minister, Martha Karua, says she has been deported from Tanzania to prevent her from attending the court case of opposition leader Tundu Lissu. Lissu, who is leader of Tanzania's main opposition Chadema party, is due to appear in court today after being charged with treason last month. And Joe Biden's family is reviewing treatment options after the former U.S. president was diagnosed with prostate cancer. Doctors made the diagnosis on Friday. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nsinzi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Right now, it's time for your sport. We say good morning once again to Musibudi Bankura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you so much, Peter. Let's start here. So South Africa won their maiden Total Energies CAF Under-20 Africa Cup of Nations title with a hard-fought 1-0 victory over Morocco in Sunday night's final at the June 30 Stadium in Cairo. Khomolemo Agegana's stunning second half strike proved decisive as the South African side claimed the trophy and also rewrote history by overcoming the North African opponent in the tournament for the very first time. Both sides entered the final unbeaten, boasting some of the tournament's best defensive records. South Africa's victory also marks their first ever youth continental triumph and also adds to their growing list of recent debut winners. Following Senegal's 2023 success, it was also they also broke their jinx last night against North African opposition, ending a run of 5 previous defeats, all by a single goal margin. So this was the team's crowning moment from last night as they hoisted the trophy for the very first time.
Amajita, under 20 AFCON champions. South Africa, if you didn't know, this is Amajita, champions, conquerors of the continent. Tata hoisting that trophy into the heavens, and they will celebrate all night long. What a special night. What a special tournament for Amajita. Counted out at the start when they lost to Egypt, and they've only gone on to win the lot.
Meanwhile, South Africa's under-20 goalkeeper Fletcher Smythe-Lowe was named the tournament's man of the match, rather yesterday's man of the match, after his heroic display that helped his side to a 1-0 victory over Morocco in that final of the tournament. The goalkeeper delivered another commanding performance between the posts, producing a string of crucial saves to deny the North Africans and also ensure South Africa lifted their first ever under-20 AFCON title. Lowe, who has been one of the standout players of the tournament, was at his brilliant best again at the Cairo International Stadium yesterday.
Thank you so much. It means a lot to not only me but for the team. This award is for the team. I mean, with only me and without them, we'd be nowhere. Together we're stronger. Yeah, I mean, obviously it's nice to do my part, but the real plaudits go out to everyone who does the work. Not even the people behind the scenes, physios, doctors, fitness coaches, and the players as well. I mean, it's it's amazing what we've been able to do. Thank you so much.
Now, at the same time, there was also brilliant performance from one of the players in terms of Tylen Smith, who was named the best player of the tournament of the CAF Champions League, following his pivotal role in guiding the Amajita side to their first ever continental title. The 19-year-old midfielder delivered consistently influential performances throughout the tournament and was also instrumental in South Africa's 1-0 victory over Morocco in Sunday's final at the Cairo International Stadium. Smith, also known for his composure, creativity and ability to dictate the tempo, scored the crucial semi-final winner against Nigeria and also proved pivotal in linking midfield as well as attack across this year's tournament. An emotional Scotty Scheffler held off a rejuvenated Jon Rahm to convert his 54th hole lead into a maiden US PGA Championship title, and while the winning margin by 5 strokes suggests his third major was a formality, a different story threatened to unfold at Quail Hollow. World number 1 Scotty Scheffler began 3 shots ahead and 5 clear of Jon Rahm, but it became a two-way duel for the trophy. Now, a patchy front 9 from Scheffler, along with the Spaniard's Rahm's flurry of birdies around the turn, meant they shared the lead midway through the final round. However, Rahm collapsed over his final 3 holes, and Scheffler coasted to a major title that also joins his Masters victories in 2022 and 2024. The 28-year-old was in tears walking down the 18th and his animated celebrations after sinking the winning putt, demonstrating just how much this latest win means to him. And finally, Carlos Alcaraz ended world number 1 Yannick Sinner's 26-match winning streak with a 7-6, 6-1 win in the Italian Open final last night. Sinner, playing in his first tournament since a 3-month doping ban, was hoping to become just the first Italian men's singles winner at the tournament since Adriano Panatta in 1976. But after aging a tense tie-break, 4 times Grand Slam champion Alcaraz was a class above in the second set. Sinner also had 2 sets points in the first set, but hit the backhand turn wide to let reigning French Open champion Alcaraz off the hook. The 22-year-old Spaniard took full advantage with some masterful play in the second set, sealing the title with a cross-court volley at the net. It's a wrap from the sports desk at the Sawa. For any sports stories you would like to share with us, our email address is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
My name is Neto, and it's
Time now to find out what's happening in the world of business. Let's catch the latest with Buntle Headbush.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thanks, Asanda. Good morning. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says it's all systems go for the national budget to be presented on Wednesday. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is back to the drawing board, crafting a third budget after 2 failed attempts due to disagreements among members of the Government of National Unity, particularly the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance parties, over the proposed value-added tax increase. The president says the finance minister is putting the final touches to the third iteration and will be ready to present the budget on Wednesday.
Yes, no, the budget is almost ready.
The Minister of Finance is putting the final touches to the budget, and that is going to be presented on the 21st. So that is not a problem at all.
Meanwhile, South Africa's Democratic Alliance says it's hoping for a case of third time lucky when the Finance Minister Ndoro delivers his budget speech on Wednesday. The first budget speech on the 19th of February was cancelled a few minutes before the address after partners in the Government of National Unity rejected the proposed VAT hike, while the second version, tabled on the 12th of March, was also rejected by some parties, including the DA. The party's Willie Okamp says he hopes for the best on Wednesday.
We know and we believe that we will not have any VAT increase or any other unreasonable tax increases because the South African people just can't afford that. We must do a lot to improve infrastructure spending, and I think that is what we will see in this budget. If we spend money in the right places on building roads, on improving our ports and our rail infrastructure, on bringing better medical services to the people, improving hospitals, building schools, those are all places where we must spend our money.
Namibia's President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah says the recently discovered oil and gas in her country is set to benefit the region and Africa as a whole, as she invites the neighboring countries to form partnerships with her citizens in the exploration of the commodity. Speaking from Gaborone, Botswana and Lusaka, Zambia during her double country tour, Dr. Ndaitwah says oil and gas is meant to develop the continent and should be explored by Africans.
Oil has been recently discovered, and we are saying this is the opportunity for African business people, African entrepreneurs to come and go into partnership with Namibians.
The Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities in South Africa, together with the Development Bank of Southern Africa, will today host the G20 Breakfast Roundtable on the empowerment of women and disability inclusion in the banking sector in Johannesburg. The breakfast meeting aims to engage the banking sector to invest in the work of the Empowerment of Women Working Group and the G20 Disability Inclusion Initiatives. Sisi Sechalo reports.
The Breakfast Roundtable will also focus on discussing banking sector investments in sustainable projects and providing financial commitments towards initiatives aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and the G20 Inclusive Growth Objectives. This will include green bonds, impact investing, and other financial instruments. Various South African banks, other financial institutions, and tax collector, South African Revenue Service, are expected to be part of the discussions.
India's third largest telecoms company, Vodafone Idea, has gone to India's Supreme Court to challenge the government's rejection of a request by the debt-saddled company to waive more than $5 billion that it owes the government. The company requested a waiver on interest and penalties it owes on $9.7 billion in dues on April 29, saying its survival was at risk. However, India's Communications Ministry has rejected the request and says it cannot be considered. The company has struggled to pay outstanding spectrum and revenue-sharing dues since a landmark 2019 Supreme Court order that widened the scope of revenues on which the dues are assessed. Now for a look at our financial indicators this morning. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,599 naira 70. In Botswana, it's at 13 pula 40. Kenya, the dollar is at 128 shilling 58, and in Zambia, it's at 26 kwacha 69. Moving on to the BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is trading at 5 reals 66. Russia is at 80 rubles 84. India, 85 rupees 56. China, it's at 7 yuan 20, and South Africa, $1 is trading at 18 rand 2 cents. $1 is trading at 75 pence to the British pound and 89 to the euro. Looking at the commodities, gold is trading at $3,225 and platinum at $991 per ounce, while Brent crude oil is at $65.26 a barrel. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. or call us on +2711 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I'm Buntle Hedbush.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
7:45 Central African time it is, and if you've just joined us here on Africa Rise and Shine, thank you for doing that. We're with you until 9 this morning, so you can still catch up on some news. Also, you can find us on our various social media platforms, on X, on Instagram, on TikTok. We are at Channel Africa 1, and then Facebook is Channel Africa. Namibia's President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah says the recently discovered oil and gas in her country is set to benefit the region and Africa as a whole, as she invites neighboring countries to form partnership in the exploration of the commodity. Ndaitwah, the first woman to be elected president and sworn in this March, is already spreading her wings across the region, strengthening already existing diplomatic and trade ties, as well as opening new ones, with Gaborone and Lusaka being her latest. Channel Africa's correspondent in Lusaka, Zambia, is author Davis Sukopo.
It is one of her first trips outside the country since being sworn in as president. And on this double country tour, Dr. Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah sets her foot in Gaborone, Botswana, and meets that country's leader, Advocate Duma Boko, and discuss a number of bilateral and regional matters, including the discovery of oil and gas. President Boko expresses interest.
Co-invest in as country, but becomes viable if we take the population as not just the people of Namibia, but the people of this sub-region, more pointedly, and the people of the African continent.
After her productive tour in the Swaziland, 15th May, she heads for Lusaka for continued relation building and establishing new trades the two neighboring countries that share immense history can embark on. Her Zambian counterpart, Hakainde Hichilema, welcomes her.
Our bilateral relationship, historic.
Like President Duma Boko of Botswana, Hichilema of Zambia also expresses his country's interest in oil and gas of Namibia.
Oil has been recently discovered, and we are saying this is the opportunity for African business people, African entrepreneurs to come and go into partnership with Namibians.
When it comes right, it will benefit not just the Namibians, but us all.
The two, Hichilema and Dr. Nandi-Ndaitwah, then speak to some projects that will benefit not just Zambia and Namibia, but the region and the continent as a whole, such as minerals and other resources.
Namibia is a mineral-based country with different metals and stones that are there for the African people, for Africa to benefit.
Around infrastructure, the two leaders in a communique speak to economic linkages through the use of Walvis Bay and Katima Mulilo border.
But for us too, the Walvis Bay corridor through here Lusaka on the copper belt into Katanga, Lubumbashi.
We found it appropriate to ensure that all our neighbors who are not coastal towns, they are linked to the sea, hence making available the dry ports. And those dry ports are not for governments alone, but for the private sector.
President Ndaitwah also recalls how deep the two countries' relations have been, as Zambia hosted freedom fighters that became presidents in that country, Sam Myoma and Hage, including herself.
Both of them have lived in here. President Myoma was commanding us from here, Lusaka, together with his brother, President Kenneth Kaunda. As chief representative, I'll recall when the South African Rights Forces bombed the Liberation Center, where I was operating from.
The trip has also seen two streets, Kasama and Sazu in Lusaka, being renamed after two founding and departed presidents of Namibia, Sam Myoma and Hage Geingob, respectively. Also witnessed by former First Lady Monica Geingob, wife of the late President Hage.
When we are here, we are back home. And I'm so happy that God has made it, that I must be in this position and to be the one receiving these 2 streets on behalf of the Namibian people.
Indeed, her 2-day tour to Zambia seems promising and fruitful, should most, if not all, projects are implemented. Reporting for Channel Africa in Lusaka, Zambia, I'm Arthur Davis, Scopo.
Now, across Africa, key developments in trade, investment and labour mobility are shaping the continent's economic future. Nigeria, Côte d'Ivoire, Benin have just been admitted to the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and this is unlocking new opportunities for infrastructure and private sector growth. Meanwhile, the United States is pivoting away from traditional aid to a more trade-centred strategy for Africa. In Guinea, well, there's a sweeping move there to revoke dozens of mining licenses, raising questions about regulatory reform. Whilst in Zimbabwe, well, the reality of immigration is clashing with tightening UK visa policies. And a trade dispute between Malawi and Tanzania has left banana farmers a little bit in limbo there. So a number of issues are playing out there. And to unpack these developments and what they could mean for the continent, we're now joined by Jeff Iyatse, who's an economist and business journalist who's based in Nigeria. Jeff, thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
It's my pleasure. Good morning, Peter.
So let's start with this big development, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development opening its doors for Nigeria, Benin and Côte d'Ivoire. What does this actually mean practically in terms of access to finance and development projects? Perhaps we can start with what this European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is actually.
Thank you very much, Peter. As you will know, this the organization is based in Europe. It focuses on Europe, and over the years, the bank has been able to mobilize funding and has invested in different sectors of the economy globally. As the name suggests, its focus is on infrastructure, and it is good news to hear that. The bank is focusing on, it is shifted to Africa and is be able to try to onboard new members from Africa. Well, it's good news because we also know that the global financial market is not fair to Africa. Africa borrow at the highest interest rate. And the demand over the year is to make the market fairer to Africa. To be fair, for the rest of the world, to be fair, to be just to Africa. It's good to hear this. But, of course, this is just a deal. Operationalization is a different thing entirely. Well, because what we know over the years is Africa cut this with different organizations, with different regional blocks, with different institutions. But to get those institutions to fulfill their obligations, or to operationalize their commitment is a different thing. This is just a commitment. It's good to hear that this is happening. But on the other hand, for me, I believe the development of Africa is going to be powered by Africa. If you're looking up to Europe, or you're looking up to US, or you're looking up to even Asia to develop Africa, perhaps you could just be deceiving yourself. Because the way the global economy works, even the financial markets, even the politics, the way it works is every country tries to take care of itself. President Trump, the policies of President Trump has even revalidated that position that it's all about national interest. So, what is Africa doing to mobilize internal funding? What are we doing to mobilize capital internally? We can't be looking at. We can't be relying on others to develop Africa. I think it's more important to think of what Africa is doing rather than what Europe or America are doing to develop Africa.
I suppose this is where institutions like the African Development Bank really need to scale up even more what they're doing. But let's focus our attention to the US now. We believe that the US is shifting its strategy away from aid, focusing more on trade partnerships. What do you make of this shift? And is this a good thing for us?
Well, if US want to, it's also it's expected that the US will be thinking about expanding its trade with Africa, because we also know that President Trump is more interested in balanced trade, is more interested in pushing for US to do more business, to trade more with the rest of the world. But Africa is merely just, if you look at the trade, the history of trade between Africa and the US, you ask yourself whether the fixation or the focus of the trade issue is not misplaced. For me, I think it's misplaced. Today, if you look at Africa, last year, I'll give you an example. Africa's total trade with China last year was almost 300 billion. What was Africa's trade with US last year? It was about 72 billion, even less than 72, I think about $71.6 billion. So if you look at that, if you look at the trade, if you look at the volume of the value of trade between Africa and China, you compare with that of US, Africa's trade with US was less than 25% of what the continent traded with China last year. But go and look at US trade with, for instance, Europe. European Union trade with US last year was nearly $1 trillion. Okay. It means that Africa's trade with US last year was just about 7% of what it did with Europe. If you look at Canada, you look at Mexico, you know that Africa is not really in the picture when you talk about US trade. Yes, we can scale up, but I think that is where this kind of discussion matters. It's not about aid, of course. Trump has shown clearly that it's not an advocate of grant and aid. He wants to do business, but you also look at it. What are the terms of trade with US? What can US actually offer Africa as of today? And what can Africa offer US? Well, it's good to follow up through with this, but the deal is with China. And we also need to begin to look at how Africa can trade with Africa. It's good news for US because US is also looking for commodities to power its economy. But it may not be good news for Africa. What happened to the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement? Because the more I hear of these deals, the more I hear of this conversation, the more I ask myself, what has happened to Africa Free Trade Agreement? If we are going to pursue Africa Free Trade Agreement, we need to begin to cut down on our on our outward looking. We need to cut down on our fixation or on our focus or trade with other parts of the world. We can only expand our prosperity, we can only grow our economy when we expand Africa trade. Not Africa-US trade, not Africa-China trade, not Africa-Europe trade.
Jeff, we're going to have to leave it there. I think you're quite clear, and I think a lot of what you're saying seems like common sense and things that we know, and we know we ought to be doing, but the getting it done seems to be the challenge. But let's see what happens. But thanks so much indeed for your insights. Great talking to you, Jeff.
It's my pleasure, Peter. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's economist and business journalist Jeff Iyatse speaking to us from Nigeria and some of the big economic stories playing out across the continent at the moment. Right, it's 7:59 and a half, which means it's time for us to start looking about the next hour, what we can look forward to. And for South Africans, it's a big week. President Ramaphosa landing in Washington, D.C. to meet with President Donald Trump. And, of course, everyone's wondering, will there be a Zelensky moment?
Yeah, we don't know. We'll see.
I doubt he'll try that with Ramaphosa.
Yeah. Well, in Zelensky's case, I mean, I feel like he was approaching it with, we need the U.S., and I don't think our President Ramaphosa is going to go with that approach of we need you.
Absolutely.
It's going to be, let's see how we can partner and equalize things.
Yeah, so that's what's coming up, certainly in the first half hour of the program. So please stay with us, and we'll be talking to a risk analyst as well as a former diplomat who understands these relations between countries. That's all coming up shortly.
8 o'clock it is though now, so let's get our latest in the world of news. Here's Onele Nsinzi with the details, and then Musubuti Makura will follow with sports headlines.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
Well, thank you, Asanda. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has departed for the U.S. He is expected to arrive in Washington later today. That will be ahead of a key bilateral meeting with President Donald Trump at the White House on Wednesday, Sean Bryce Peace reports.
The highly anticipated meeting has been framed as an opportunity to reset the strategic relationship between Washington and Pretoria and draw the Trump administration into deeper engagement within the G20. While the visit will be seen as an opportunity to correct misrepresentations about South Africa as alleged in Trump's sweeping executive order in February, issues around trade, tariffs and geopolitical concerns, including Ukraine and Gaza, could feature prominently. The White House custom has been to engage nation leaders in front of the world's media, which could offer a riveting window into how these two heads of state interact face-to-face on issues of such sensitivity as alleged genocide against white Afrikaners who have been welcomed as refugees into the United States.
Some South Africans have meanwhile expressed mixed views over President Cyril Ramaphosa visiting the U.S.
Can we be allowed to have South African solutions for South African problems?
President Ramaphosa and President Trump should focus on just trying to have benefits on both countries.
I don't think this meeting is going to yield any positive result.
So Ramaphosa should do as Trump is, firstly make peace. The South African government has attacked Israel in the ICJ. I think it's a huge mistake.
Personally, I do believe that Trump is just playing politics.
It's very important that all relations are intact for the good of our economy.
As a president of a country of over 60 million people, you need to know that you've got so many people backing up, so you shouldn't be bullied by a president from another country.
A leading Kenyan lawyer and the country's former justice minister, Martha Karua, says she has been deported from Tanzania to prevent her from attending the court case of opposition leader Tundu Lissu. Two colleagues accompanying her were also reportedly detained and deported after flying in from neighboring Kenya. Lissu, who is leader of Tanzania's main opposition Chadema party, is due to appear in court today after being charged with treason last month. Karua is a respected human rights advocate and a vocal critic of what she calls democratic backsliding in East Africa. Tanzanian authorities have not yet commented. The South African National Prosecuting Authority says it will proceed with the appeal of the acquittal of Nigerian televangelist Timothy Omodoso. The televangelist returned to his country of origin, Nigeria, yesterday. Omodoso voluntarily opted to be deported after immigration authorities arrested him in East London in the Eastern Cape province earlier this month. The NPA says the law does not require active participation or presence of an accused during a court's hearing of an appeal. It says if the appeal succeeds, it will apply for Omodoso's extradition. Joe Biden's family is reviewing treatment options after the former U.S. president was diagnosed with prostate cancer. A statement from Biden's office says doctors saw him after he found a prostate nodule and experienced urinary symptoms. The doctors made the diagnosis on Friday, Sharon Bryce Peace reports.
The cancer is said to be hormone sensitive, which allowed for effective management. A small nodule was found on Biden's prostate last Tuesday during a routine physical examination, which necessitated further evaluation. Biden, who was elected U.S. president in 2020 and served until January 20th this year, was 82 when he left office, making him the oldest person to occupy that office.
For any news stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us +27 11 714 4459. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Ntsinzi.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in your sports news this hour, Raymond Mdaga hails DDC impact on Amajita's historic AFCON Under-20 glory. And Max Verstappen wins the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. Details coming up at 8:30.
Bringing you the energy. News.
Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to arrive in the United States later today for a high-level visit with President Donald Trump. Now, the meeting comes at a time of tension between the two countries, following President Trump's controversial executive order offering refugee status to white South African Afrikaners, citing alleged persecution, a move that was strongly rejected by Pretoria. Now, the visit is seen as an attempt to ease diplomatic strains and reaffirm bilateral ties between the two nations. Bonolo Maribe has more.
President Cyril Ramaphosa did not mince his words. He's pushing back against this information that is being disseminated by those who are seeking refugee status in the United States of America.
We all know as South Africans, both black and white, that there's no genocide here. We are not genociders. We are not committing any act of hatred, act of retribution or violence against anyone who is a citizen, even if they are not citizens of our country. We are not made that way. So we will make that extremely clear. Every South African knows and agrees that there's no genocide here.
One analyst, Dr. Philani Mthembu of the Institute for Global Dialogue, says this is an important time for the two leaders to talk.
The first thing that we must welcome is the fact that you are having a physical meeting between President Ramaphosa and President Trump. It will, of course, be somewhat overshadowed by this idea of granting refugee status to Afrikaners from South Africa, which of course is based on a completely false narrative. But I think what we also need to understand is that the Trump administration is trying to impose penalties on South Africa for its position in the International Court of Justice.
SABC News took to the streets of Johannesburg to gauge the public sentiments.
I think they will be able to discuss such issues and find a common ground. Them having this back and forth and not physically meeting. You know, some things can be sorted out in terms of physically meeting and ironing out these issues in terms of how do they go about it and what actually happened. The president can probably get a chance to explain.
I don't think there's necessarily any solution because there's a clash between the views and principles of the USA compared to South Africa. The abolishment of the DEI in USA and in South Africa were like pro-BBBEE.
I don't think this meeting is going to yield any positive results, mainly because I feel like President Trump is focused on building the economy of the US and will do whatever it takes to just make sure that the economy of the US is top-notch and the US dollar is worth a lot of money.
Meanwhile, a number of parties will keep a close eye on this much-anticipated working visit. Bonolo Maribe, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
So, with this very important visit of President Ramaphosa to Washington, people are watching closely to see how the South African leader will navigate a delicate diplomatic moment. His meeting with President Trump comes in the wake of a series of strained exchanges, most notably, of course, as we've been reporting, this offering of special refugee protections to white South Africans under the claims of persecution, a move that certainly has sparked some outrage and was labelled as misleading by the South African government. Well, to unpack the implications of this visit, the messaging it sends to the global stage, and what it may mean for the future relations between Pretoria and Washington, we're now joined by Dr. Kingsley Makubela, who's a seasoned diplomat, a risk analyst, and former Director General in the South African presidency. Dr. Makubela, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Peter.
What do you make of this visit? Sometimes as journalists we are prone to hyperbole, but is this the most important visit by a South African president to the US in terms of our democratic era, in terms of relations between the two countries?
Well, Peter, the visit is very important because it comes at a time of heightened tension between South Africa and the United States. And that's why all of you are so much focused on what direction would this visit take. And of course, it can take either the worst or the best part of the outcome. Peter, the fundamental issue would be the manner in which President Ramaphosa handles this meeting. The only thing that he has within his grasp is to channel the direction of the meeting, given what we've seen with other heads of state and government before. There are certain things that President Ramaphosa ought to be very careful about. One of them, Peter, is that he's arriving in the United States early their morning hours. So he will be there Monday morning. So he has to be very careful that he doesn't start to discuss his visit with people who are arch enemies of Donald Trump, be they in the Democratic Party or within the political establishment, because the body politics of the United States is so polarized. And we've seen what happened with what I call the Zelensky syndrome. Zelensky went to consult with Democrats who really pumped him with how to handle Donald Trump. And it turns out very disastrous. So I think any consultation that the president may want to have, he should do it after the meeting, because the Americans are following every move that he takes. Let me say the administration, following every move that he takes. So that's what he has to manage.
All right. I think we know kind of what's at risk for South Africa, but to suggest that there's no risk for America is probably not really analyzing the situation properly. Donald Trump can't behave the same way he did with President Zelensky in Ukraine, right?
Well, Peter, he can. That's why I'm saying Ramaphosa can have a good meeting or he can have a bad meeting. Remember, the Oval Office is his turf. That's why he feels very strong. And really, it would be unwise, in my own opinion, for President Ramaphosa to be confrontational in that meeting. Because the meeting, Peter, we all know is going to take a form of, before the substantive discussions are held, he's going to have this press conference and he's going to lay out what's coming up, he's going to lay out his views. The temptation during that press conference is that President Ramaphosa may want to respond to that. And it may create confrontational space. I think he must reserve any form of confrontation in the closed session of the meeting, where there are no journalists. But in the glare of journalists, and Trump knows how to handle the American journalists and the aggression of the American journalists, of course journalists will be asking President Ramaphosa to say, is there genocide taking place in South Africa? My view is that President Ramaphosa should say, these are issues that are subject to a discussion. We're going to discuss this with President Trump in the closed meeting. We'll share our views, and we hope after this meeting we'll find each other in terms of this matter. and not challenge him in that open meeting, because that would turn out to be very disastrous. To do that, Peter, he may have as well stayed here at home and go toe-to-toe with him.
Does President Trump genuinely believe there's a genocide on white Afrikaners taking place? I mean, he must be getting CIA briefings, and there must be CIA agents in South Africa who are giving him intelligence. Surely he doesn't really believe it. It's just something that he's spinning.
Well, Peter, you know, that's where the issue is, because the institutional capacity to provide the president with actionable intelligence in the United States is there. They have all sorts of intelligence. They have their allies that can verify some of the intelligence they are having. That's where the challenge is. The problem is that there are people within the administration, quite indeed, who are feeding this information into the president. And he's making this pronouncement on the basis of people who are feeding this information. One of these people, I think, is a person like Elon Musk, who's providing this kind of information to the president. But our president must be careful how to handle this, and he must come out of this thing quite clearly. And I think he should focus, in my own view, Peter, in the closed session, around the nature of crime, because it's not targeting of Afrikaner, because the Genocide Convention makes it quite clear in terms of definition. He should really focus on explaining to him the nature of criminal activities that we're seeing in the country. And some of it has to do with transnational criminals. And I think the best outcome that we can hope for, it's a commitment by Donald Trump to say, well, we would work with South Africa in terms of combating the crime that is targeting business and ordinary people in South Africa. It's a scourge that they are going through in the United States. That's why they are deporting people that they think are criminals. So he should be able to come up with this kind of commitment. Peter, there's a need for President Ramaphosa also to create a retreating space for Donald Trump. And that retreating space can be done in a closed session, not in the press conference.
What do we do about the refugees? Does he encourage President Trump to stop this program, or does he just leave it alone? Because by allowing it to continue, it does send a message, doesn't it?
You know, it's not a South African problem per se, if he continues with us. It's the credibility of the United States presidency, it's the credibility of the White House to make pronouncements that are unfounded. And I think we're all concerned that you don't need anyone to dilute the credibility of the United States presidency. Because if he keeps on making these pronouncements, even if when he makes pronouncements on serious things, people are going to say, oh, it's Trump with fake news. So it's important also for the United States to really reclaim the credibility of the presidency of the United States, and therefore find a graceful way to withdraw from this allegation of genocide and find a way of dealing with the challenges that may be there in South Africa in terms of building the relation. So that's where the credibility is. But I think President Ramaphosa should provide an explanation and the definition of genocide. And of course, it has to do to a very large extent with what's going on in Israel, you know. And I think with respect to that, President Ramaphosa should draw in the latest information that comes from Israel. You may have seen 550 former senior general Mossad and Shin Bet officials who have written a letter to President Trump, which is a public knowledge now, urging Trump to stop what's going on in Israel. You know, because they are of the view that what Israel is doing to Palestinians is very serious. They are running short of saying this is genocide. So there are issues that he can use to really elucidate his position with respect to that. We've seen also the former prime minister of Israel who came out to condemn Netanyahu in terms of the. So he has a lot of tools in his toolbox to use to rebut that. Of course, South Africa had the responsibility in terms of responsibility to protect, which the United States is part of the General Assembly resolution. So I think he can handle this in a total different way. But these are issues to be done in the closed session, in my view.
I'm wondering at this time whether Africa generally is watching this exchange that might happen this week between the presidents of South Africa and the US. How Donald Trump treats South Africa, might that influence how people look at America going forward in terms of whether they should be more fearful, or maybe they should be saying, you know what, maybe let's look towards Russia, let's look towards China?
Quite honestly, because he's the first African head of state to meet with Donald Trump in the second administration. And I think Ramaphosa would also be the first to go to the Oval Office to have a meeting with Donald Trump. So it will be a precedent setting in terms of how Donald Trump engages with African leaders. And given what he previously said about Africa as something whole, so a lot of African leaders are looking into this meeting, and it may actually create a sense of South Africa being a victim of the United States. And it may create a lot of resentment toward the United States. So there are a lot of stakes that are involved in this meeting, not only for Africa, but also for the Americans, because they are trying to build bridges with the continent. They are trying to access resources. And I think that's how this meeting would go. Peter, there are issues that Ramaphosa has to play on. For instance, if you take the G20, Peter, there's a program now. Within the program, they're going to deal with the resolution of conflicts. Ramaphosa can utilize that to persuade Donald Trump to attend the G20 meeting, because Donald Trump seems to want to create a legacy around the resolution of conflicts around the world. If he can use that, of course, give him praises where he has made successes in terms of bringing ceasefire between Pakistan and India, and his endeavor in the Middle East to find a solution in the Russian too, because later today, Trump will be speaking to Putin and other European heads of state, encouraging to keep on doing that. And this being part of the G20, that it will be unfortunate for the G20 to come up with a resolution that does not reflect the important role that the United States is playing in terms of resolution of conflicts around the world. So there are a lot of soft spots that South Africa can use in its diplomatic approaches to Donald Trump.
Donald Trump has said, we don't know if we can go to South Africa under these circumstances for the G20. Can he afford not to go? Because in the end, South Africa actually, yes, it's the presidency resides with Pretoria, but the G20 is more than South Africa.
Absolutely. It's actually the United States is the next presidency of the G20. Next year, it will be held in the United States. And then the legacy of the resolution of conflict, the United States would want to pick that up and elevate it to its presidency. So it would have to set up a good precedent in terms of this meeting. So if Donald Trump is not here, he'll be self-isolating. He'll be quarantining himself in the United States when issues that are so strategic and of interest to the United States are being discussed at this G20. And you would like to set the tone for that, for the continuation.
I'm going to ask you to put on your diplomat hat on now. What would the foreign ministers and the diplomats behind the scenes been doing, talking to each other before the meeting of these heads of state?
Well, you're referring to the summit, the G20 summit?
No, I'm talking now about President Ramaphosa's meeting with Trump.
I think they will do a lot of damage control in terms of the utterances that have been made. They'll be looking into finding face-saving approach both for Ramaphosa and for Trump, because such meetings, Peter, is not going to be a zero-sum outcome. There must be some level of protecting the integrity of South Africa and protecting the integrity of the American. Of course, with the acknowledgement to some extent that what was said, he was misled and so on. You know, states never apologize, Peter. There's no state that will give apology to another state, but you always provide a decent retreat. You create a window for a decent retreat. And I think they should, the ministers and other diplomats should find a way of a graceful retreat from this issue, because it will really keep on making the United States irrelevant. It's in the best interest of the US to retreat from this notion that there's genocide going on in South Africa. The United States can keep on arguing about the DEI issues. That's their policy issue, no doubt about that. But the question of genocide is quite serious. And they have a responsibility. There's a genocide. They have a responsibility to elevate this to the ICJ. And failure to do that, it's an indictment on the US. So there are issues that are really problematic for the United States to stick to this notion that there's genocide going on in South Africa. A lot at stake for the US too.
Have you seen any signs of a pulling back, or perhaps of trying to calm things between the US and South Africa in recent weeks or days? Or is this just something that's getting worse?
Peter, if it was me organizing this meeting or advising anyone for this meeting, I would have opted for senior officials meeting, elevated to the ministerial meeting to resolve this thing and set the tone and make pronouncements about the findings before the meeting of heads of state. By the time heads of state come in, they actually cement what senior officials have done, what senior officials have concluded on this matter. But given the fact that this is at a summit level, the heads of state, that's why the fear of all of us is that it may go the Zelensky syndrome and humiliate Ramaphosa, who may want to respond in that pre-substantive discussion engagement with the press. And if he does that, I can bet you, Peter, it would go the Zelensky way.
My goodness. Let's talk a little bit about trade. It's important for both countries. Billions of dollars worth of trade happens between the two states. Will AGOA be a big thing on the discussion table?
My view is that I heard the president saying that we have to speak about our trade and so on. My view is that the president shouldn't go that route, because AGOA is due for renewal by Congress this year. Trump can easily say, listen, the AGOA renewal, it's a legislative process that the other side of Pennsylvania is taking care of it. I don't want to preempt whatever recommendation they would make. I'll look at it when they bring it to me, because that's not my function. And he will be quite correct to say this and leave it there. So the president must focus on resetting the relationship and setting some form of level or structure for engagement in future in dealing with all these problematic issues that may emerge between the two countries. Instead of going into granular details of trade discussion with Trump, Trump may also want to raise issues of trade with South Africa. But we are really amongst the major countries in terms of dealing with the United States. We are largely benefiting because of the AGOA arrangement. So if we go that route, it may turn against us, because he may want to say, listen, the time, for you sending your goods here duty-free without a reciprocal arrangement, it's over. So you need to tell us what is that we can also export to South Africa duty-free, because you have to give something in this respect. And what can South Africa give, given the size of the economy of South Africa? But if South Africa has managed to resolve the bigger picture, I think some of the smaller issues will fall in, however important trade may be. But I don't think at this meeting that should be the focus. The focus should be on resetting the relationship.
All right. And talking about this relationship, I guess it's a difficult one to balance looking like you are the one going with a begging bowl, and at the same time having to keep your dignity, because up until now, South Africa has been acting diplomatically, the US not so much. Can that create the impression that one side is being a little bit more meek than the other?
Well, quite honestly, this is not a discussion of two equals. You're going to be discussing trade issues with a country that is $36 trillion GDP, and a country that's 400 $450 billion GDP. So it's chalk and cheese there, Peter. So it's not a discussion of equals. If you look at the size of the US and the level of influence, it's not. But this is the question of the issue here is two sovereign states with the right to take independent decision. I think that should be quite clear that South Africa, however small the economy may be, it has a right to make its own decision, even in terms of deciding who to trade with, who not to trade with, and issues of secondary sanctions. Those are bigger issues that ought to really inform a strategic discussion within the context, Peter, of this geopolitical realignment and the multipolarity that is emerging. Frame our argument along those areas will be very useful, because the United States has a tendency to come up with extraterritorial laws that really puts pressure on other countries. So I think South Africa should stand up on those issues. And this standing up should be done, Peter, still in my own view, in the closed session.
Dr. Makubela, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much indeed for your time and your valuable insights.
Always a pleasure, Peter. Thanks very much.
Thank you. That's Dr. Kingsley Makubela, seasoned diplomat, risk analyst, former ambassador and also Director General in the South African presidency, speaking to us ahead of President Ramaphosa's visit to the United States and Donald Trump. And all eyes will certainly be on Washington. But all eyes right now are on Onele Nsinsi as she brings us the news headlines.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to arrive in the United States of America later today on a state visit to meet his counterpart Donald Trump. Top on the agenda is reported to be the strained relations between the two countries after American President signed an executive order offering South African white Afrikaners refugee status on allegations that they are under attack. The U.S. Embassy in Libya has denied a report that the U.S. government is working on a plan to relocate Palestinians from the Gaza Strip to Libya. On Thursday last week, NBC News said the Trump administration is working on a plan to permanently relocate as many as 1 million Palestinians from the Gaza Strip to Libya. And Israel says it will allow a limited amount of food into Gaza, ending a 10-week blockade that's brought the territory to the brink of famine. Channel Africa News, I'm Onele Nsinsi.
SABC News. Headlines. The African Perspective.
And now it's time for your sports. Good morning once again, Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning once again from the Sports Desk for the final time this morning on Africa Rise and Shine. We'll start with football news. Amajita head coach Raymond Mdaka says the DStv Diski Challenge, also known as the DDC, has played a significant role in the South African national under-20 team success, culminating, of course, in last night's victory as the newly crowned Africa Cup of Nations champions. Mdaka was speaking during a post-press match conference last night. The Sultan Amajita defeated Morocco by 1-0 in the AFCON Under-20 final played at the 30th June Stadium in Cairo. The core of this team, including the goal scorer Homole Mokekana, plays in the DDC, and Mdaka says this league has played a critical role in this team's success in this year's competition.
Again, salute the DDC because it made it easy for us to be able to see players weekend over weekend going to different places and seeing them, always also following them because the country is so big. If it wasn't the DDC, you wouldn't be able to see them. You couldn't drive, maybe make sure that you make follow-ups or you go see them, but through the DDC we're able to do that. And
So Amajita made history by becoming the first South African men's team at the junior level to be crowned African champions. This victory also serves as sweet revenge against Morocco, who had defeated Benny McCarthy's team 1-0 in the final 28 years ago. Mdaka attributes this success in this game, as well as throughout the tournament, to a disciplined approach.
Well done to the boys. They've done themselves good, but we'll always want to thank everybody, the players, the technical team, starting from the first games in the group stages. You can even see the margins of the results. It's 1-0, 1-0, but thanks God, we were able to go through all the journey until we came to the final, and we ended up winning the final. What a difficult game, honestly.
On to athletics news now. The South African sprint star Agane Simbini continued his 100-meter dominance, picking up another win at the Atlanta City Games in the USA. The South African clocked a wind-aided 9.86 seconds for the win. He started a bit slow, but hit his stride at the 50-meter mark, while ahead of Nigerian Ododi Onzuwekeri, who was in second with a run of 10.05 seconds. Simbini's 9.90 seconds from the Botswana Golden Grand Prix in April remains as the official world lead for 2025. Simbini was expecting the reigning Olympic champion Noah Lyles to be lining up alongside him, but the American withdrew from the race due to what they call a tight angle that had impacted him in the last 2 weeks. The 31-year-old sprinter has now won both the 100-meter Diamond League events this season and a medal at the World Indoor Championships, and also anchored Team South Africa to gold at the 4x100 meter World Relays event. On to some Formula One news now. Max Verstappen has surged to an impressive second victory of the season at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, the Dutchman having snatched position 1 at the start before holding his position ahead of McLaren pair in an eventful afternoon that featured virtual safety car as well as a full safety car phases. Now, the race got underway in an exciting fashion as pole sitter Oscar Piastri initially launched well off the line, only for Verstappen to make a stunning overtake, resulting in the world champion going on to build a lead in the laps that followed. Piastri then followed a number of drivers who had made an early pit stop, as questions persisted over whether a one-stop or a two-stop strategy was the way forward, with around half of the field also remaining out following that earlier flurry of action in the pits. For the other half, the picture was turned on its head when a virtual safety car was called on lap 29 after Esteban Ocon had pulled onto the grass in the Haas car. But there was also more drama to come later on when a safety car was deployed owing to Kimi Antonelli pulling off the track on lap 46 due to an issue with his Mercedes. And finally, made in basketball team captain Lebasa Selepe is confident that they can make a huge impression as they make their debut in the Basketball Africa League tournament in Rwanda this weekend, representing South Africa. The Blue Soldiers, a Johannesburg-based Basketball Africa League team, replaces the Cape Town Tigers, who had become a familiar representative for South Africa in the Basketball Africa League over the last years. Now, with the Kigali Now conference tipping off tomorrow, the MBB facing Al Ahly Tripoli from Libya, Selepe says they will come with the winning mentality to this conference in the hopes of representing the country well at this year's tournament. It's a wrap from the sports desk at the Sawa. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, our email address is newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or give us a call. The newsroom line is +27 11714 4459. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Mosibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Hi there. Do you want to elevate
For our business update on Africa Rise and Shine, let's say good morning again to Bundle Headbush.
Business news on Channel Africa. The African perspective.
Thanks, Asanda. Good morning. The South African government says its noted global credit rating agency Standard & Poor's decision to maintain the country's sub-investment status while affirming the country's long-term foreign and local currency debt ratings at BB- and BB respectively with a positive outlook. According to S&P, fiscal consolidation is likely to continue, while any borrowing requirements will benefit from access to deep domestic markets and an actively traded currency. This as Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana prepares to make a third attempt at tabling the national budget in the coming days. The ratings agency now expects the country's economy to pick up slightly to 1.3% this year. Naledi Ngcobo reports.
National Treasury has noted S&P's assertion that South Africa's sovereign credit rating remains constrained by relatively low economic growth, a sizable fiscal deficit, and high government debt. Government says its growth strategy will continue to focus on maintaining macroeconomic stability, grow investments, and execute reforms to promote a more dynamic economy. Government further emphasized that building state capacity in core functions while supporting growth-enhancing public infrastructure investment will remain a priority.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says it's all systems go for the national budget to be presented on Wednesday. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana is back to the drawing board, crafting a third budget after two failed attempts due to disagreements amongst members of the Government of National Unity, particularly the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance parties, over the proposed value-added tax increase. The president says the finance minister is putting the final touches to the third iteration and will be ready to present the budget on Wednesday.
Yes, no, the budget is almost ready. The Minister of Finance is putting the final touches to the budget, and that is going to be presented on the 21st. So that is not a problem at all.
Meanwhile, the Economic Freedom Fighters Party in South Africa this morning is holding what it's calling a VAT victory march in the capital, Pretoria. The march is set to begin at the Union Buildings, from where EFF members will proceed to the offices of the National Treasury. The march comes 2 days before Finance Minister tables the budget on Wednesday. Sibahle Muta reports.
The party's victory march comes after what the EFF has termed as a successful defeat of the VAT increase in Parliament and in court. Last month, the Western Cape High Court suspended the 0.5 percentage point VAT increase in an application brought by the EFF and Democratic Alliance. The EFF has maintained that Parliament's adoption of the fiscal policy framework was unlawful. Streets that will be affected by this morning's march include Stanza Bubape, Madiba, Paul Kruger, and Lillian Ngoyi.
Namibia's President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah says the recently discovered oil and gas in her country is set to benefit the region and Africa as a whole, as she invites neighboring countries to form partnerships with her citizens in the exploration of the commodity. Speaking from Gaborone, Botswana and Lusaka, Zambia, during her double country tour, Dr. Ndaitwah says oil and gas is meant to develop the continent and should be explored by Africans.
Oil has been recently discovered, and we are saying this is the opportunity for African business people, African entrepreneurs to come and go into partnership with Namibians.
India's third largest telecoms company, Vodafone Idea, has gone to India's Supreme Court to challenge the government's rejection of a request by the debt-saddled company to waive more than $5 billion that it owes the government. The company requested a waiver on interest and penalties it owes on $9.7 billion in dues on April 29, saying its survival was at risk. However, India's Communications Ministry has rejected the request and says it cannot be considered. The company has struggled to pay outstanding spectrum and revenue sharing dues since a landmark 2019 Supreme Court order that widened the scope of revenues on which the dues are assessed. Taking a look at our financial indicators this morning, $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,599 naira 70. In Botswana, it's at 13 pula 40. Kenya, the dollar is trading at 128 shilling 58. And in Zambia, it's at 26 kwacha 69. Moving on to the BRICS countries, $1 in Brazil is trading at 5 real 66. Russia, 80 rubles 84. India, 85 rupees 56. In China, it's at 7 yuan 20. And South Africa, $1 is trading at 18 rand 2 cents. $1 is trading at 75 pence to the British pound and 89 to the euro. Looking at the commodities this morning, gold is trading at $3,225 and platinum at $991 per ounce, while Brent crude oil is at $65.26 a barrel. For any business stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I'm Buntle Hedbush.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective. Your morning companion with the stories that matter. This is Rise and Shine on Channel Africa.
45 minutes past 8 Central African time it is. Today is Inflammatory Bowel Disease Day, and those living with inflammatory bowel disease are encouraged to ask deeper questions, because healing isn't just about feeling better, it's about repairing the gut from the inside out. IBD is a chronic illness that includes Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, both of which cause long-term inflammation and damage to the digestive tract. It's a disease that's often invisible to others, yet relentlessly disruptive to the person living with it. So for more, we're joined on the line by a gastroenterologist, Dr. Talia Khan, to find out more about IBD or inflammatory bowel disease. Dr. Khan, thank you so much for joining us, and we welcome you to Africa Rise and Shine.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Your time.
Good morning.
So firstly, let's differentiate between inflammatory bowel disease and irritable bowel syndrome.
Okay, that's a great question, and especially because if we look at inflammatory bowel disease, which is often referred to as IBD, versus irritable bowel syndrome, which is commonly referred to IBS. So they have quite similar acronyms, and they're both digestive conditions, which can cause gut symptoms such as abdominal pain, a change in bowel actions, but they really differ significantly with regards to the underlying causes and the potential damage that it can cause to the digestive tract. So in essence, inflammatory bowel disease or IBD involves chronic inflammation which can damage the gut, whereas irritable bowel syndrome does not. So if you just focus on IBS first, so irritable bowel syndrome, it's a chronic digestive disorder that causes symptoms like abdominal pain, bloating, diarrhea, and or constipation. But it's known as what we call a functional disorder, or a disorder of the gut-brain interaction. And it's a disorder that we can't find any physical, structural, or biochemical problems within the gut. And it's more thought to be to arise from disruptions in the complex interaction between the gut and the brain. But importantly, with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, there's no inflammation to the mucosa of the gut. So this is in comparison to inflammatory bowel disease. Today, IBD Day, very important, a topic to highlight. And inflammatory bowel disease, it's a group of chronic inflammatory diseases that primarily affect the digestive system. And the two main ones are Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, as you mentioned. Inflammatory bowel disease, it's believed to be an autoimmune condition where the body's immune system mistakenly attacks the gut lining, and this leads to quite severe chronic inflammation and subsequent damage. We don't really know what the causes are. There are many stipulations, but in essence, it's believed to be an interplay in a patient with a genetic predisposition, and then various environmental factors and possible triggers. So just with regards to ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, I think it's important just to know they're two distinct disorders, but they do have some overlapping features and similarities. Important to know they're both chronic and long-lasting conditions. So ulcerative colitis, it affects mainly the colon, anywhere from the bottom part, the rectum, to involve the whole colon. It's a continuous inflammation, whereas Crohn's disease can affect any part of the digestive tract from the mouth to the anus. And importantly, these are chronic conditions, they're lifelong, and they can really cause damaging, subsequent long-term damage to the gut.
Let's talk through some of the symptoms then of IBD.
So if we look at, as I said, they just, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, two distinct disorders, but they do have some common features. So usually patients with ulcerative colitis, the cardinal feature is diarrhea, and the majority of time it's actually bloody diarrhea. So frank blood in the stools, diarrhea. They have what we call increased frequency and urgency. So they have multiple episodes of diarrhea throughout the day. They have an urgent need to go to the toilet. Abdominal pain can also be a feature. Whereas with Crohn's disease, the predominant feature is abdominal pain. They also can have a change in bowel actions with diarrhea. Some other symptoms, fatigue, weight loss, loss of appetite are more sort of non-specific symptoms, yes.
In more severe cases, how does IBD affect the daily life of the person who's suffering from it or struggling with it?
So with both Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, you can get varying degrees of severity from mild to really severe. So if we take a patient with, severe ulcerative colitis, for example, they'll be needing to use the loo up to 20 times a day, which, as you can imagine, affects their day-to-day activities, work, it affects their relationships, and just their daily activities. It can be really, really disabling.
So typically, for an average person, how often should we be going to the bathroom so that we can maybe ascertain whether there is a problem that we need to further investigate or not?
So look, there's no normal bowel action pattern. Normal would be anything from once a day to, even actually once a week. The problem is when you're having worrisome diarrhea. So if you're getting, watery diarrhea, up to 10, it can even sometimes be less. It's varying. Blood in the stool is very concerning, and that needs to be investigated. And then again, if this is accompanied by, severe abdominal pain, weight loss, fatigue, loss of appetite, you do need to see a specialist, and further investigations are needed.
So doctors around the world have started to change in terms of how they treat IBD. Instead of focusing on controlling the symptoms, the new goal is to heal the gut lining. Talk to us about that.
So that's a very important point. So as you said, in the past, so say I get a patient who comes with this constellation of symptoms, a patient has had bloody diarrhea, abdominal pain for the past few weeks, months, even sometimes. One of the investigations I'm going to do is a scope or endoscopy or colonoscopy. And essentially what this is, it's a long, thin pipe that we pass through the anus, and we have a look at the rectum. It's got a camera at the end, and I'm able to see inside the colon. And patients with ulcerative colitis and Crohn's, some patients with Crohn's disease as well, will have inflammation of the lining or the mucosa of the colon. So what I will see is redness, ulcers, there'll be bleeding, and just a loss of the normal pattern that I would see in a healthy individual. So that will be the scope findings. The endoscopic findings is where we can actually look at the mucosa and see the inflammation, and the very grading systems we use as well. So as you said, in the past, we would assess patients, we would treat patients with IBD, and all we want to see is response or resolution. But over the years, studies and research has shown that symptom resolution itself, it's not enough. And what we actually aim for, really the pivotal goal of treatment in IBD, is mucosal healing. So I see a patient, I start treatment, and I repeat the scope in a few months, also all depending on the severity. And when I go into the colon, have a look, I want to see that the mucosa has healed. I want to see a healthy looking mucosa. What I also do is we take lots of biopsies. We send them off to pathologists. Pathologists have a look at it under the microscope, and we grade the severity of inflammation. But yeah, so in essence, when we treat, what we want to see is endoscopic mucosal healing. And why this is so pivotal is because the research has shown that patients who attain mucosal healing instead of just symptomatic response, long term, they do much better. So their disease control is better. Symptom control is better, they get less flares, their long-term prognosis is better. It really decreases the rate of many complications, such as surgery, losing their bowel. So, as I said, it's a crucial goal of treatment for patients with inflammatory bowel disease and something that we need to really attain and focus on.
So you already mentioned that inflammatory bowel disease is not, it's something you can't cure. So how does one manage it once they have IBD?
Yeah. So you're right. So it's a long-term, it's a chronic disorder. But I think what's important to know is nowadays with modern medicine, we have really good medications that are able to control the inflammation and possibly even change the course of the inflammatory bowel disease. So the various, I don't think we have enough time to go into, but we have various medications that we use to treat it, various medications for the short-term control of inflammation, and then obviously long-term control, which is essential. So it's medications. In complicated cases, unfortunately, surgery a lot of the time is needed. And what's important, I think this brings up an important point, that IBD, we really need to diagnose it early. When we diagnose it early and we institute treatment early, we can really get on top of the inflammation early and prevent a lot of these long-term complications that affect patients. So as I said, there's a range of medications, surgery may be needed, and it's really just very important to have a strong, good relationship with your patient to ensure compliance with medication, for example.
Yeah. How much of a role is the diet, does the diet play when it comes to either the onset of IBD or the management of it?
So as I said, we still aren't 100% sure, what the exact cause of inflammatory bowel disease is. It's a kind of a constellation of factors. And one of the postulations has been diet. There's a sort of... They also look at the incidence of inflammatory bowel disease in patients living in urban versus rural settings or environments, and the various diets, and more research is going into what the role of diet in the cause of inflammatory disease and treatment thereof. So in essence, what I do tell my patients, diet, you want to, because it is a disease of inflammation, the various kind of anti-inflammatory diets that patients can follow. Patients with IBD, in essence, the best diet over and over has been shown to be the Mediterranean diet, which is also good for lots of other chronic underlying disorders. And then we just tell patients to avoid any kind of food triggers. And with that regard, every patient is different. Interestingly enough, though, diet plays a very important role in children with IBD, and the various dietary modifications which are used, which help treat children with IBD, but they haven't been shown to be effective in adults. Yeah.
Do we know if it's more prevalent amongst men or women, or it's just across the board?
Yeah, so it's really across the board. We are seeing, in the past, it was really thought to be a disease of the West, of, industrialized, urbanized countries. But we're seeing the prevalence and incidence really is increasing in developing countries. In Africa and South Africa, we are seeing a rise in IBD. According to the CDC, just across the board, there are about, over 7 million people living with inflammatory bowel disease.
Well, thank you so
worldwide.
much for thank you so much, Dr. Khan, for educating us on this important fact. And it is today the Inflammatory Bowel Disease Day, so we definitely needed that awareness. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Thanks. Dr. Talia Khan is a gastroenterologist. Giving us a bit of information there in terms of inflammatory bowel disease. I learned so much from that chat. I think we really need these things every now and again. Health checks.
Absolutely, and especially for men, we are useless and terrible at getting looked at and getting checked up. But anyway, it's good to have these programs and these kinds of interviews to educate us all.
Yes, so coming up after Rise and Shine here on Channel Africa is going to be On the Move with Benjamin Mushatama and Palesa Tau, so stay tuned for that. But from us on Rise and Shine, Asanda, Beda and
Peter Ndoro. Have a great day.
Goodbye for now. We'll see you tomorrow, 6 till 9 on Channel Africa.
Cheers, everyone.
World listens, and Channel Africa makes sure of it. For business, for culture, for Africa. Partner with Channel Africa, because Africa's voice is the future. Africa is a story, a living, breathing, ever-evolving masterpiece, and the African perspective.
Looking at your top stories this hour, South Africa's president to arrive in the United States later today, and Kenya's ex-justice minister deported from Tanzania. Your latest news, greetings to our listeners. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to arrive in the United States of America later today. Ramaphosa is on a state visit to meet his counterpart Donald Trump. Top on the agenda is the strained relations between the two countries. That's after the U.S. president signed an executive order offering South African white